on our UGA Sports channels. You may be watching this on our YouTube channel, which you should be subscribed to. You may be watching this over on our Facebook page, which you should like. I think I don't spend a whole lot of time on Facebook anymore, but I'm glad that you do because our channel there is popping, and we really like that a lot. And then if you're watching this on my Twitter feed, I'm assuming you follow me already. But that's cool. Thanks for doing that because I like followers. We're talking about Georgia potentially being in a super conference one day. What we learned as we woke up this morning, Brent, the USC UCLA members of the Pac-12. As we go to sleep, we see the calendar has that in jeopardy. I'd say 2024. The big news of the day, UCLA, USC going to the Big Ten for the 2024 season. Obviously, this has been in the works for quite a while. Had very much the feel of when Texas and Oklahoma announced to the SEC. So what's your immediate reaction, Brent?
That it's the next step. I mean, it started with Texas and Oklahoma. I think all of this started when, Missouri and A&M came into the SEC forever ago. Because A&M, yes, but Missouri just never felt right. And I think that started the realm of, hey, we don't necessarily need to keep the tradition. We can just be in a conference that makes a lot of money kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then Texas and Oklahoma continue it. And now it's just the next step into college football becoming what it inevitably will be here soon, which is a professional football league.
We'll get into what exactly you mean by that because I'm interested in it. If you go to usctrojans.com or you can go to UCLA's website, you can see all their fancy schmancy words of press release that they've probably been working on for at least a week. I would imagine these things usually take some time to do because they have very long quotes from important people, president of the university, AD, USC. They're just saying, we're awesome. We want to be awesome. And there's what's in between these lines is there's a lot of money to be made. That's the best part here.
That's the other thought that my other initial reaction was, I think it was 1997. I looked it up, and I'm pretty sure that was what it was 97. When P. Diddy at the time, I think, Puff Daddy at the time, released the song, It's All About the Benjamins. Like, that's what this is. This is. I saw a thing where Northwestern and whoever else in the Big Ten are getting $80 million from the Big Ten network or whatever, and USC is getting like 30 from the Pac-12. It's money. It's everything.
1997 was also about the last time UCLA was relevant in football, but that's neither here nor there.
Yep.
USC had its shine, obviously, with Leinart and whatnot. Throw some comments up here from people because we want to hear from you. So if you're in the chat, we'll try to chat about this. We've been doing this for about a half hour. Foster Mall says, I'm so glad the Dogs won a title when they did because college football is getting insane.
It is. It legit is. And that's I think the biggest thing, their travel games are going to be bad news. I mean.
But so that's a point that I really want to make here because, like, we got to – and I think this is what you mean by the next pro football league. We got to stop with the amateurism stuff. Because, like, if you're asking young athletes to hop on a plane from Los Angeles and fly to New Jersey on a semi-regular basis now, because, like, we're not just talking football where you pop out there once a year. I guess in this case, if it ends up being 16 to 20 teams in the conference, maybe you only go there once every 2 or 3 years. But, like, think about a baseball series that happens. Or think about, volleyball and all these other sports. Like, this is going to be a logistical nightmare. And the real winners are obviously these universities that will be making media money. But it's like the airline partners because they're about to rake it in.
100%. And as someone who's a West Virginia, from West Virginia, a West Virginia fan, and I see that now, and it's with what they have been in the Big 12 over the past few years. It is just that. It's a nightmare. Those travel games are going to be. I mean, I can't imagine being a baseball player and going to Minnesota at the end of February. That's insane.
Yeah. Maybe they'll just have to do the schedule where, all the home games for those teams just are later in the spring, I guess. I don't know exactly how that's going to work out.
Well, you bring up a great point, though, because what is this driven by? And what is this all about? It's about football. Like, I don't understand why and I think that might be an eventual next step, is that football exists in its own world. And I don't, and you have
because the Pac-12 has been really good at basketball. They've put a lot of good teams into the NCAA tournament, and I'm specifically speaking.
And tons of other sports too. Stanford is good at everything except the bigger sports. So I think football needs to be its own entity.
But I don't know if I disagree with that. My obvious hope is that eventually this leads to promotion and relegation, as I've longed for forever, because what that would do is everything would be decided on the field. Because we're going to get to a point here that, and I'm curious your take on this. Right now, as we said, the SEC and the Big Ten are set to have 16 teams in their respective conferences in 2024. That's not far away. We're halfway through 2022 already. Do you see that number sticking, or do you, I kind of think, this is going to turn into two massive super conferences, 20 minimum? I wouldn't be surprised if it jumped to 24 for each.
Yeah, I think that's where it's headed. But I will say it's also, I could see a lot of these other ones pulling together, and maybe you just get all this talk, and it then eventually ends up where you just have 4 16-team conferences. Thus, it's just shifting. It doesn't really change the landscape in essence. It's just four big conferences instead of the 5 or 6 that used to be. So, but I will say with your promotion relegation thing, that to me is where this ultimately needs to head, is that if you get to the 20 or 24 realm, to me, if you look at the last 20 years of college football, 10 different schools have won the national championship. Mm-hmm. And if you take out the USC and Texas early on in that last 20 years, it's even less. So it's football in essence, it's conglomerated into a small set. So treat it like the NFL, where you have 32 or 40 probably. If you get to 20, maybe 24, 40, 48 teams, something like that. You have a 12 or 14 team playoff. You don't have conference. You have divisions, so your schedule is kind of set up, and those teams play each other for the most part. Maybe you have 1 or 2 non-1A, and I think, to me, I would bring back 1AA, and the 90 remaining teams, say the 90 other FBS teams or current FBS teams, they go have their own playoff, and you got 2 different playoffs going, where one playoff's during the week and the other's on the weekend. Just more football, and give somebody. I think of it from a West Virginia fan perspective also. Obviously someone who covers Georgia, I have to think about that perspective, but the homebody in me from West Virginia, they're never winning a national championship in football. Never. In the current structure. It's just not going to happen. They don't have the resources. They don't have the recruiting base. It's just not going to happen.
Here is a statement from the Pac-12, which is a lot of words to pretty much just be a sad face with a sad violin. Yeah. If they would have just put an emoji on here, I think that would have served just the same purpose. Of course, they're bragging about their great conference and they have all these great teams, but you take out USC, and in terms of recent college football relevance, you're pretty much talking about Oregon, and I guess Washington, because they did make a college football playoff since it's been in existence.
Bringing up those 2 teams, 100%. Bringing up those 2 teams,
Utah. Let me give Utah a little shine.
Yes, Rose Bowl last year, and great coach, been good over the past few years. Are they next? There was the same guy that tweeted the initial just bombshell tweet. How about being that guy that tweeted that today?
Yeah, wasn't that the San Jose News? Shout out to local news for hopping on that one.
Yeah, it was
good on him.
But and then he said, they're not done. They don't expect them to be done. Oregon, Dan Lanning, you're going into your first season, all excited. Hey, maybe I can compete for a Pac-12 championship. And the league now is just in a
Oregon won't be left out in the cold. Some teams will be left out in the cold, and that'll be difficult to manage. Oregon will be coveted. Miami will be coveted if we start seeing the ACC get poached. If this turns into pick your favorite team from the ACC to join the party, Clemson would be poached.
Yes.
I think a Florida State might be, frankly, and this is strange, a Georgia Tech may be on the cusp there, which, they've kind of halfway been relevant in Power 5 football for a little while anyway. But, like, that's a team that did make, Paul Johnson got into a couple of bigger bowl games. But that's a decade ago, it feels like now.
Yes. It feels like forever ago with where they are currently.
This stuff is changing so quickly. And let's say, this is hypothetical now, let's say the ACC does begin to get poached, because I think that's, if it goes this way where it's 2 mega power conferences, I guess in this case, you're always going at least in pairs, but I think if you have 16, you're probably going to end up getting to 20. If you had to pick 4 ACC teams that you would have most intrigue in joining the SEC, who would those be?
Well, my initial thought is it's just about hyper competitive football. So I thought Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and UNC. Like, those 4 teams were my initial thought. You had some other thoughts, I think.
Well, I thought that I was right there with you with UNC for a variety of reasons. One of which is, like, if you're going to keep stapling this to academics, well, that helps the conference if UNC is involved. That's one of the more prestigious state schools in the country. You could say the same for University of Virginia. And so maybe that's one involved, and that's a good athletic program too. I think if you take a North Carolina, that's one that has to be stapled with Duke for the basketball ties. And I know they have other rivals too. NC State hates them, and Wake Forest is right there. But UNC and Duke, I don't think those can be separated. That's Auburn and Alabama.
I think that's a good point. That those two are kind of, in a way, attached at the hip because
it's like in a world where, like, nothing seems like precious and tradition doesn't matter as much anymore. There's still a couple of, like, foundational things, even in the announcement today, which is the 2 LA teams are going to stick together.
Yeah, and that's
what happens.
I think if you get to a world where you have 4 16-team conferences, I would so personally just love to see West Virginia slide into the ACC. Because, all the natural old school rivals like Tech and Pitt and Syracuse, Big East type school, Miami, all the Big East, old school Big East, like it would naturally fit there. Because when you look at the geography of what the Big Ten how many teams, it would be 16. So still called the Big Ten though. But it's just such a, like, I wonder, there was a great article last year.
Though, Brent, with the 16, like you're saying, let's say that the ACC filled up, and then the remainder of the pack, what you're essentially saying is that the Big 12 would get kind of spread out around, and maybe a couple other ones get sprinkled in. That becomes such imbalance in the football sense, especially.
Yes.
Of where SEC and Big 10 would just be these gauntlets of leagues. SEC more so even than the Big 10, but, like, Big 10 right behind it. Yep. And then kind of meh.
And then meh.
To me, those would already almost naturally separate themselves. And that's why I keep thinking that SEC and Big 10 have their eyes set on something bigger. And it's probably to exclude the other 2 or 3 or however many leagues out of the money. And if you, like, the story that I saw was that after this announcement came out today, Apple, with its over-the-top service with Apple Plus, started to get some renegotiations going with Big Ten money. Obviously, part of that's because Apple's based in California, and then those UCLA and USC, that's big. That's a big deal to their people there. That's the future of this, because Apple's got way more money than all these traditional media partners. You think ESPN's got money? You let Apple really care about college sports, or you let Google hop in there and be like, yeah, we can do that on YouTube.
Apple has more cash on their balance statement or balance sheet than the United States Treasury.
Yep.
Like, they can write a check for anything.
I'm doing this on a MacBook. I have my iPhone beside me. My watch is on the charger in there. Like, we're all in this.
4 products, gazillion dollars. But Amazon too. And Amazon is now getting into the NFL. Who's to say that they don't then, all right, we figure let's do a little bit in the NFL, and then we figure it out and we'll do it in college.
I mean, you're already seeing this, right? They're like CBS, as legacy partner, being kicked to the curb by the SEC. You don't have enough money for us. Sorry.
And I think
that's going to happen to ESPN at some point too. I don't know when that happens. It may be 20 years, but that's going to happen.
Yeah. And I agree. But it also kind of gets back to maybe my initial thought was that, in essence, this is a professional football league, because you have gazillions of dollars from a media standpoint being thrown around, conferences and schools and all that. When you add in NIL, transfer portal, which in essence is free agency, it's a professional league. And the NFL is probably sitting there thinking, this is awesome. You guys are developing talent for us, and we're still going to dominate.
System. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The hard part about it for me is that, like, on its face and on its merit, because I've interviewed a ton of athletes in the last 10 years of covering this stuff, for the vast majority, having college football be so intertwined with academics at a university is really good for like the 99% of people who, won't end up playing or making a career out of sports in the long term. Like, having access to that university and those resources and those networking, like, it's life-changing for them. And a lot of people wouldn't have that opportunity otherwise. Like, it's a really cool thing that they're able to use their athletic skills to kind of help them in life that way. If it ever gets untethered from academics and that gets sacrificed, I do think that that's a sad element. And I'm not talking about like DeAndre Swifts of the world. We're like, yeah, I can look at that guy. He's not going to come close to getting his degree. And it's not because of anything with him. It's because he's not going to be here long enough.
Right. His talent warrants being utilized in other places.
He has so many reps and his body's going to age, and then he's got to make his money now. If he wants to come back later and get it, the NFL's done a good job of kind of incentivizing that, and colleges tend to be good about making that happen. A lot of players don't do that. Some do, which is always really cool when you see someone 15 years later go through and get their diploma or whatever. But all to say that, like, for the majority of college football players, I think that's a pretty healthy thing for them overall, even though the demands of football are such, and this is probably more of a culture thing of like, hey, you don't have to work as hard as you are, coaches. You don't have to be as structured as you are, like, with your players. But, like, I do fear that a lot of people are going to be missing out on some life-changing stuff if it gets fully taken away from academics. But, that's a very thin sheet at this point, and it gets thinner by the day.
And the other is the fan perspective. Like, I'd put my bring back 1AA thought out there, and somebody says the best part of let's play ball on Twitter. I can't really, JR3DGD. The best part of college football in its current form is each game means something. I'm not ready to see UGA sitting out players in the Tech game because a playoff spot is clinched. I think, like, every year that sort of tradition and thought of what we as now adults grew up with college football and all the things you loved about college football, and New Year's Day, even like sitting and having gazillion TVs and watching football all New Year's Day. The Rose Bowl was always Big Ten, Pac-10, Pac-8, whatever it was at the time. Like, those things are just gradually dissipating away.
Yeah, and some of that in this particular case for Georgia Tech, like, the talent is at such a different gulf right now between the two that, like, the best players essentially get to sit out because they're up by 4 touchdowns after the first quarter.
Very true. That's a great point. That the Tech game's maybe not the best example there.
That particular
end of season game.
That particular game already feels like one division playing a lower division. And
it's a different sport.
That's not always the case. Like, we've seen Georgia stumble. We've seen Georgia, lose in recent years. It's less and less. But, like, I do think college football looks at it as a whole, and kind of the point you made earlier to, like, heading into this season, how many teams do you think have a realistic shot to win the national championship? I guess I could go further and say, to me, there's only 3 teams I would even consider that, like, I'd put money on thinking I have a shot to win.
Yeah.
And it's
Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Now, are there some beyond that could get in the mix? Yeah, maybe. But, like,
things
those
fall
3
away,
are so far ahead
injuries.
of the others right now. Because, like, you have to think about it. You have to get to the college football playoff and win 2 games. Okay? I'm fully confident that each of those 3 teams can do that. I can't say the same about Notre Dame. I can't say the same about Michigan. I probably can't say the same about Oklahoma this year. Texas, I don't think will even get there. So then you start dwindling it down, and you're like, well, can Clemson come back? Because like, I got to see a lot from them to think that'll happen. All to say that like, this is June 30th, and we're already looking at the next season and saying before the first game, we feel like it's down to 3.
Well, and I will say, like, at least last year, the season kind of had ebbs and flows where, Clemson fell off the cliff and some other teams that you thought were going to be good didn't. And then Michigan rose up and, beat Ohio State finally.
But you never thought that Michigan was a threat to win the title, right? I never did.
No. And Foster Moss on our little chat thing. Bowl games don't even have this same feel anymore. It's true. Like, I don't – like, bowl games are the most – I'd rather watch a playoff game. Sorry. I'd watch something that I know matters massively to the people in the field, and the competition is going to be great. But
and that's changed pretty quickly too, because like it started if your team's only in the Music City Bowl, do you really care? And it was like that kind of faded away. But if you were in the Peach Bowl or if you were in the Orange Bowl, that was a big deal. Didn't matter if that was college football playoff. And kind of gradually over the last couple of years, you're like, all right, cool. It's a Peach Bowl.
In this topic,
like last year, Ole Miss was in the Sugar Bowl, right? But it wasn't college football playoff. And then Matt Corral decides to play in it, and everyone's like, "Why is he doing that?"
And then gets hurt.
That shifted a whole lot. Really, only in like 4 or 5 years, because if you remember when Leonard Fournette first sat out of his bowl game, he got chastised.
Him and McCaffrey.
Yeah, like. It was a bad thing, and now it's turned around. It's like, what? It's dumb if you do play,
right?
Not from the fan perspective, but I mean, some fans, yeah. But yeah, Foster. New Year's Bowls felt like something, and now it's only a playoff. So if the sport looks at that and says, okay, more playoff,
and I think that's where this is now. Okay, you say that. That's a great point. If playoff expansion happened, like it was agreed upon, and either happened last year or was going to happen, does this still happen?
Eventually, I think yes, but maybe not at the same pace.
I think it drove it forward. It hastened the process a little bit because of the money, obviously.
I don't think it would expand enough, because if you look at results in recent years, like last year, would there be a Pac-12 team even in
Utah?
A top 8? Yeah, Utah would have been up there. I guess because of the attrition, and especially if these leagues. But see, like, if that's the case, then do Texas and Oklahoma think that they have to move over? And some of that comes down to money deals. Some of it comes, like, from what I've read, I haven't kept up with it a ton. It seems like the presidents in the Pac-12 just didn't prioritize football when everyone in the Southeast and the Midwest was putting money into football and seeing results coming from that. But look, they're the have and the have-nots. Like Vanderbilt, like you were saying about West Virginia, they'll never win a title. Vanderbilt's never going to make a playoff, period.
No.
Never going to get close, frankly, especially now in the SEC.
Right.
It would take such a cataclysmic shift of everything for.
I was going to say the interesting thing about this, obviously, the talk about this topic in general gets kind of old, because it's all right. When are we done? Because it's always seems like it's inevitably discussed, but each time it makes it more interesting for somebody else. Like to me, Notre Dame. Like Notre Dame is very interesting now because they have the ACC ties. They were in the ACC. They did the 1 year of the ACC. Like, do they now look at this Big Ten sort of bigger conference and they're like, okay, or do they think, oh, we're still Notre Dame and we can be independent in a way, especially with football. Lincoln Riley. That guy.
I'm gonna love when USC has to go play Purdue on a Thursday night and it's snowing.
I mean, Oklahoma. Nah, I'm gonna go to USC Pac-12. I can win that really quick and do that. No, USC's going here. Like his life is completely different. And now he's got a couple homes or all that USC's paid for, but that perspective. Okay, what we got? Question.
Alex Mitchum, is the competitive gap between 3 or 4 teams and the rest of the teams in the country a contributing factor for why we haven't seen a playoff expansion? Honestly, I think it's more that college football just tends to have changed slowly. Like all this in the last few years is a bit of a shift. But you got to remember, how long was the BCS around before they're like, let's do a 4-team playoff?
Yeah, and then plus now, the deal for the playoff initially is through 2025 or something like that.
Yeah, but like I think they're looking at it now and being like, well, this playoff is a great thing, but there's not enough people involved in it, so we're missing out on some opportunities here. And that happens in most every sport. And like even in high school football around Georgia, way more teams make the playoffs than miss it in most leagues.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Usually it's 4 out of 7
4 teams,
region, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And then you think about other professional sports, and if we're calling this a professional sport, which I think we both view it as, in the NBA, more than half the teams make the playoffs, and now they added the play-in where even more have a chance to get in there. And that's a money play too.
NFL did the same thing.
NFL, exactly. Baseball has done the same thing. So this is a new American thing now where we don't care as much about the regular season. The only purpose of it is to make a little bit of money. And then from a competitive standpoint, if you do well there, your playoff path should be easier. But like we're trying to find the upsets.
And when you think about, all right, we've talked all this time about this. Who have we kind of rarely mentioned in a way? The team, the conference that's sitting the prettiest. That's the SEC. Like it's their sport.
Well, it's sitting the prettiest, and I thought for really about a year now that Greg Sankey is the faux commissioner of college football because all the dominoes kind of fall after whatever his actions are. I do think with this move that the Big Ten, I'm not saying gets like quite on equal footing, but I think it makes it a viable foe. That all right, you're doing things this way too. Here we go. Like now I feel like the SEC is in lockstep, and it's good to have kind of that common opponent, you know. But I mean, I think both leagues are saying. I mean, the whole alliance thing was funny, right?
That was
ACC and Pac-12. Sorry.
That was like a handshake that never actually happened. That was, shake hands. I'm going to take that back real quick.
For the health of the sport, Kirby Smart talks about this a lot, right? That like at smaller schools, they need to play the bigger schools for the money grab. Totally get that. But the way to do this is if you want to have one of those games on the schedule for whatever reason, fine. But like eventually, I hope someone seriously considers the promotion and relegation aspect of it because like we obviously don't care about travel now. So that's not a big deal. And if the whole structure has some like kind of money sharing to it, where like, SEC and Big Ten get all this money, but they have to share, 3% or something down with the leagues below it. And then, if you're the champion of a league below, you rise up and then there are consequences for losing at the top too. Like, I think that's so much fun. Like that's my favorite part of any kind of like European soccer because sometimes soccer is not that much fun to watch. So I hope it gets considered, but I doubt it will.
I feel good about my 8 years, $120 million prediction for Kirby's contract now.
You may be lowballing it.
15 years or $15 million a year to be done. That'll put in his youngest son out of high school.
Let's wrap with this because we've been talking about kind of what this means for the SEC. In particular, what do you think this means for UGA?
I think their schedule is going to be more fun. Like UCLA was already on the schedule, right? In a couple years.
Oklahoma was too, and now they're in the conference. So.
Right. More, the home schedule. Like Mr. Will Dickerson, thank you for commenting there. Better home schedule. No Sanford. Like to me, like if you look at the way I propose, where you have a Division I that is 40 or 48 teams that literally only plays each other. And you're going to, and that's where, some years, much like, Tom Brady beat up on the AFC East all those years because the Jets and the Dolphins and the Bills couldn't get out of their own way. Like that's going to happen for some teams, or you're going to get the easier sort of other conference versus your own division being tough. It's going to happen, but you play those teams and those team only. Maybe you ditch the conference championship games, go back to like 11 games, 10, 11 games, who knows what. And now you got to, playoff, that I think that's where it eventually should head to. and then the rest of the, maybe you get one of the 1AA, what I'm saying is the new 1AA teams. Who knows? But the part of this that, from a Georgia perspective is you're going to see teams and go to places and possibility of games that you haven't had before. And that makes it fun because it's in the end, by the way, all of this is outside of for the people that are involved in it from a job and their employment or the kids themselves playing, it's entertainment, and better games is more entertaining.
And from a competitive standpoint, Georgia's in line to be as good as anybody, and every team will be going through some kind of transition and whatever's coming. This is not your grandfather's college football. It's all changing. And I think some of it's probably not the greatest for it. I think a lot of it probably is. Whether it's good or bad or you feel good about it, all of that's irrelevant because as long as the dollars are there from the media standpoint, this is happening. Like that train does not slow down. And it's like we were saying, when Apple's like, oh, you're doing this, huh? Okay, now we're interested. Or
if you look at the highest rated programming forever, like it's 98% sports.
Yeah, like
live sports still moves the needle from a programming standpoint and will for the foreseeable future. Especially once what can happen in Vegas can happen in any state in the country.
Governor Kemp, get on it.
Then it becomes even more.
I've traveled to Louisiana and Colorado and New York this year. All those places you can legally sports gamble, and I did, just on my phone. Can't do that in Georgia, and that's fine. Although I did pick 2 players on the men's side with decent odds to win Wimbledon. One of them got COVID and had to back out, so I got my money back there. The other lost in the first round. So, yeah. Oof. Felix Auger-Aliassime, top 10 in the world.
Remind me not to bet tennis anymore.
I was on a run with tennis though. Like I usually bet really well with tennis. It's just a first round upset was surprising. Anywho,
interesting day though. It was an interesting day in sports. It was an entertaining and obviously what's I think what's also funny. I was talking to somebody else. What would we have done 15 years ago on a day like today? You would have been refreshing like ESPN.com or FoxSports.com. You hit refresh all the time. Or watching SportsCenter. What do you do now? What do you do today? What do you do now? You just scroll through Twitter. Everything changed, and you get opinions from everybody. That it's the consumption of it has vastly changed as well.
Pretty impressive for UCLA and USC and the Big Ten to keep this quiet until today, because obviously they were ready to roll today.
Yeah,
like that was voted on tonight. It was leaked out this morning.
Yeah, Big Ten Network had their logos and maps and things like that.
Like. All preparation was done, and that means a lot of people had to be tight-lipped about this. And that's probably going to be how this goes for a little while. And I don't think it's over. I really do think we're headed down that path of 2. And then, I think the SEC probably finds some more people from the ACC. And like you said, from a travel standpoint, I love Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I hope that Georgia has more opportunities to go there because that means I have more opportunities to go there. And so – let's maybe they'll have a structure where Georgia can keep that game with UCLA. But if you're looking at Georgia's future schedules right now, I would not plan anything past 2023 because we don't even know if the 2024 schedule is going to stay like it is. Funny, isn't it next year that Georgia was scheduled to go to Norman to play Oklahoma? I think that's 2023, right?
I think that's right.
But that return trip wasn't going to be until multiple years later. So the way it would be currently structured is Georgia would go play Oklahoma, the Big 12 team, but when Oklahoma would be set to come back, they'd be the SEC team. Well, that ain't going to fly. So something's changing there.
Yeah.
So
special shout out, John Wilner was the guy's name that broke the thing today.
Who's he work for?
It says Pac-12 Hotline. Bunch of different ats afterwards.
I think
syndicated via KSL Comms, Oregon Lives, LA Daily News, like a bunch of other stuff. But
so it's
that guy broke the internet today.
Good on him. Will Dickerson says that he drives 3.5 hours for Samford, Kent State, Vandy, and Georgia Tech, and it's not worth the trip. I understand. because Athens is awesome. If you're going to drive 3.5 hours and it's not going to be competitive football, you might as well just come in an off time where you can get whatever restaurant you want to get into. But
it's the changing. All this is changing, and it's not going to stop. And we're not going to talk about it probably much again until the playoff expands. I would bet that's probably the next because if another team goes or if something happens anymore, the conversation is not there until once playoff expansion is set, that sort of stuff.
Let's see. Foster Moss says that sliced bread should have broken the news. I like it, Foster. That's funny.
Good call.
Hey, we have to hop off of here because we're going to do some work that you'll see on this YouTube channel a little bit later on. So if you've watched this, subscribe to what we're doing over at ugasports.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're watching on Facebook, thanks for doing that as well. Let's see. I was trying to see what D-Rock Irish popped in here. Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated reported that UCLA's AD had not spoken to the Pac-12 commissioner yet. Well, I think that's okay.
Peace.
I mean, it's not the most professional thing, but he's probably been busy dealing with this new boss. He knew he had a new boss on the way. Man, this is going to be crazy. It's going to be we rolled the punches, and I think Georgia's in a good spot. Georgia's in the best league. It's one of the best teams in the best league. It's one of the best universities in the country. Georgia's in a good spot. We'll leave it at that. I was trying to wrap up, and I got distracted by the comments. Thank y'all for watching. That's Brent Rollins. I'm Dayne Young. We work for UGAsports.com. We'll see you